Okay, we're back to the end part of our Theology Proper Part 1. And here, what I want to do is give you a little bit now on, when we think about proofs for the existence of God, one thing that is usually not taught is, well, what actually counts as a proof? What does it mean to prove something? So I'm going to give you a little bit on the concept of proof, the nature of proof. I also do a course called Legal Evidence and Apologetics, where we look at juridical method and what constitutes proof and evidence and so forth. So a short overview on that. Roughly around page 17 of the Theology Proper Part 1 syllabus, I have a topic here. It says the burden of proof and burden of persuasion for the existence of God. And here, it's important normally in any discussion, debate, formally or informally, you sort of want to follow this rule. And that is that whoever makes the assertion about something, they have the burden of production, they have to go forward, and the burden of persuasion, they have to give you proof for it, and then give you the right level of proof for you to be able to change your mind. If they're asserting something, then you have the right to say, what's your evidence for that? What are your arguments for that? See, because they are the ones making the assertion. Which, by the way, that's different from, if someone says there is no God, they're making a positive assertion of the non-existence of God. So before you start, exploding with your apologetics degree or something, saying, yeah, boy, let me give you about 5 hours of responses to that. No. Remember our talk about breaking down confidence. You say, why should really? It's something like, I love you, but why should anybody believe that? Why should anybody believe in the non-existence of God? And again, don't accept the burden of proof, production, and persuasion. Put it back on them, saying, look, you make the claim, you prove it. But they're going to say, and what you're going to see in contemporary atheism is say, well, no, you're the one saying God exists. Yeah, but you're the one saying God doesn't exist. You're making a positive statement of the non-existence of God. So you carry that burden of proof. Well, and you might get someone who wants to argue with you, but the fact is, they say it. If a Mormon says the entire church has been lost and had to be restored with Joseph Smith, good. You give me the proof for it. That's your burden of proof, burden of production. So that's why I say probably one of the bigger mistakes in doing apologetics and evangelism is answering too quickly. What you want to do is show, for a vast majority of people, is they're pretty empty as far as reasons why they believe what they believe. And that's why you want to get them and show the shallowness of it, that they really usually don't have good arguments or proofs for why they believe what they believe. And of course, as they're giving their proof, well, it's because, the logic problem, the problem of evil, which we talked about in the last section, and then you give your theodicy and say, no, there's actually, all I need to do is show that it doesn't necessarily follow that God can't exist if evil exists. Here's at least one example of how he can exist and how evil can exist if he's good and omnipotent. So there, I've just negated that and gave you a counter argument, an example of how God actually deals with evil. So again, you'll be more persuasive and a better apologist if, again, very important, if you can start causing doubt in the person's system. So when we start thinking about this, let's go through a couple of definitions. Like, what does it mean for someone to have the burden of proof or the burden of persuasion? So in the middle of page 17, I have a statement here. It says, in the law of evidence, one must offer evidence and argument to prove disputed facts. This duty is usually divided into burden of production and the burden of persuasion. So what's the burden of production and going forward with evidence? It's this: duty of a party to produce evidence for all elements of the case. So if an atheist says God doesn't exist, well, you're the one that has the burden to basically prove every element of what it would take to prove the non-existence of God, not me. And then if there's no offer of evidence at that point, say, look, you haven't given me any good reasons to believe, I'm not going to change my mind on that. And in fact, all you've shown me is that you don't have any good reasons to believe. And that's where next, not only do you have to address all the elements and the burden of production, But in the burden of persuasion, it's not up to me to give you counter arguments. It's up to you to actually try to persuade me with arguments, not just all the elements, but actually give arguments to persuade me. That's what we call the burden of persuasion. And the burden of persuasion is that it's the duty of the party with the burden to persuade the trier of fact in evidence law of all the elements of the case. And this duty generally does not shift between parties. Okay. Now I'm going to give some legal terms here. Yeah, I have a law degree and theology degrees and so forth. So this is on the legal evidence side of things, where the point is this. Let's say this. If you go and file a civil case and you say this person was negligent, okay, then, negligence case, duty, breach, actual cause, proximate cause, damages. Not only do you have to argue all of those, and the burden's on you. You made the assertion, well, that person was negligent and caused me harm. Great, there's the elements for negligent. You must give evidence and argument for the 5 points, and it's up to you to give arguments and persuade the trier of fact, which is either the judge or the jury, depending on how the case is agreed upon, whether it's a bench trial or not. So on that, and guess what? If you don't offer argument and meet the burden and level of persuasion for all the elements, it's gone, case dismissed. Okay, the other side doesn't even have to defend it. So let's say you got duty, breach, actual cause, proximate cause, damages. Let's say you went through all 4, okay, of your in your pleadings, your evidence, and so forth, but you forgot to plead damages. That's it. I move for case dismissed. All right, case dismissed. Why? The entire burden rested on the person making the assertion. In criminal law, for example. When you go into court, it is presumed that you are basically sinless, holy, and pure and clean as the wind-driven snow. The entire burden of proof, okay, starts with the prosecution. They have to give evidence, okay, evidence for, burglary, right, breaking and entering at night, okay, of a dwelling with intent to commit a felony therein. And that's the prosecutor's burden to present evidence for all of those elements and give arguments for them. And at that point, give it to the point where all are presented with the right level of persuasion, so you don't get, again, case dismissed. For example, you don't show in your argument that the person actually broke into the dwelling. They may have entered, they may have done this, case dismissed. You didn't prove all the elements of the case. So this is what goes on day to day, hundreds of thousands of times in courts all over the world. The person making the accusation is the one that carries the burden of proof and the burden of production to give evidence to a particular level of persuasion, which we'll get to next time, whether it's preponderance of evidence, whether it's clear and convincing, whether it's beyond a reasonable doubt. If you don't do that, you don't win. So that's the beginning to think about how you would begin to think about what it means to prove something and who has the burden of that, and why it's going to be helpful not to too quickly start answering people, because remember, you want them to get broken down in their confidence on what they currently believe. So make them shoulder their burden. Next time, we're going to look at quantities and levels of persuasion, which are going to be helpful. And I'm going to give you some applications for that, and then some overviews of the arguments, like what's cosmological and what's teleological. Thanks. We'll see you next time.